All righty. Well, it's once again time for Orange Pill Podcast with Max and Stacy. Now, Stacy, as everybody on Twitter knows, Monday, January 23rd is my birthday. It's coming up. It's kind of a celebration around the world. And fortunately, here in El Salvador, someone has been thoughtful enough to bring a nice birthday gift to me. Mario, who's a good friend of ours, brought these sweeties, these original Salvadoran sweets. And these
Dulces típicos Tulita.
Right. So typical sweets of Tulita.
Yes.
Which Tulita, I assume, is a town somewhere in El Salvador, perhaps?
It could be
a what? A woman?
It's a woman.
Oh, okay. So Tulita is a woman, and she's known for her great desserts, perhaps. Well, it's a whole bunch. The coconut one, I'll sample a couple here. This is coconut. Mm-hmm. And, you can tell these are, like artisanal. Very nice. Coconut is excellent. Mario said this was probably the best one. It looks like not a brownie, but what we call blondie.
A blondie?
In the States.
Never heard of that.
Okay, that's like a fudge.
That's just really attractive eating.
You like the way I'm just wolfing it down like a wild, savage animal. Okay, well, we'll be looking at these later. This is like some kind of candied fruit.
But it's good that you start off explaining why that giant pile of garbage is in front of you. Like
these are delicacies from Tolita, a very famous sweetie maker in El Salvador, where we are now. And what?
I also noticed on your microphone there,
uh-oh,
you have an actual Torgos. Because, of course, with our last set, we got sold a can of parrot. Right.
We got bamboozled into buying a parrot that was sold to us as a Torgos. Torgos is the national bird.
Yeah.
As I understand it.
I guess they actually they have the very similar colors, right? It's all that green, blue, orange.
Yeah.
Must be a reason for that. It must blend in with the trees and the orange.
It's kind of tropical,
Yeah.
They got that tropical look. And they have this distinctive tail business on the end here. It's very nice.
I also want to say that I feel guilty now that Mario bought these birthday presents for you, because now it definitely means I have to get one. I could say that we will be getting new backdrops. We'll have, Orange Pill. We'll have Max and Stacy on one, Orange Pill on the other. And, I like these titles, the Max and Stacy report ones.
Yeah.
But you just need to change that one title card there and have it say Orange Pill.
Right. So let me get this straight. We already have on order some new kind of signs coming into the studio.
Yes.
And that was already in place.
That's already in place.
Mario brought me a birthday present. And you're saying that your present to me are these new signs.
Yes.
That are already on order.
Yeah. I'm going to repackage them.
Okay. So you're going to put a ribbon on them, and that'll be my birthday gift.
I think it's acceptable.
Is it acceptable?
I think so.
Okay.
I think everybody would agree.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyway, so we got that out of the way, and now we could start the show.
Okay.
Fair enough. So people could fast forward. Maybe I should.
Why would they fast forward? I mean, every single thing that we interact with is presentable as good podcasting content. I mean, would you just fast forward through the whole delicacy section? I mean, this is part of the country here. This is a demonstration of what is like living here. People want to know what's like living in El Salvador. You can expect this type of quality dessert right in your own kind of living room, right here.
Right. Well, I'll have to taste some. Is it actually like on a sweetness scale? Say the scale is 1 to 10 or 1 to 11. Okay. Yeah. How sweet is it?
I almost fainted from sugar. I almost had a sugar shock. This is probably the sweetest sugary thing I've ever had in probably 5 years. I need an insulin shot. I think that's what you get, an insulin shot. I need something, but it feels good, along with my coffee from Coffee Cup, which is, of course, a chain of coffee shops here, the first, as I understand it, to make inroads in there.
I'm not a big fan of sweet. You know that. Yeah, I know. I don't like sweet.
No, you're not sweet at all.
I'm not sweet. No, I'm sour.
No, you're
I'm sour.
You're sour or salty. I think salty. I think you're very salty.
Yeah.
You have a salty, savory quality, as they say in Europe. You're savory. I think that's the best way you could possibly say it.
I heard that the markets were basically pricing in inflation back at 2.7%. interest rates, Fed rates back at like 2%.
Yeah.
You know, I think they were pricing in all the perfect ingredients of, you know, not too sweet, not too frothy, not too salty.
Oh, the Goldilocks market.
The Goldilocks market. This
Right.
is what I heard, and this is what I saw on my Twitter stream. But you know what? I just saw it go through, and I didn't like check it for. You know, this is the sort of journalist I am. I didn't really.
Yeah, you
check
don't check it. You don't need to check
I
it.
didn't check the source or anything. I just like came onto the news here.
No, there's three stories. There's markets are going higher. We don't know why.
Yeah.
Markets are going lower. We don't know why. Markets are unchanged, and it's the Goldilocks market.
Yeah,
It's not
yeah.
too hot, not too cold. Those
Yeah.
are basically the only three stories you see on financial news.
Yeah.
And the Goldilocks market, of course, means that the markets aren't particularly volatile today. So it's the Goldilocks market. And then tomorrow, if there's a sudden crash, it'll be, oh my God, there's a crash. Why is there a crash? Et cetera. But those are the three basic stories.
Yeah, and I know that there's some sort of confab going on in Davos with all those horrible cantillionaires. And I was really thinking of them because, you know, the cantillionaires meet. You and I have been making financial news content forever, right?
Yes.
For many, many annual Davos events. Of course, we've never been, but we report on them and mock them and make fun of them all the time. And we always go back to that one from 2010 or 11 in January where they had said they needed $100 trillion in new credit. And pretty much they got that, right? Since the 11 years since then, 12 years since then. But so since COVID and of course all the Davos sorts, I think like we just blew the fuse on the backdrop there.
Yeah, we lost part of the part of the set. Just blew up. Exactly. As long as the sound's working. As long as the sound's working, I don't care if everything else. Oh, there you go. Okay. Just make sure the sound is working. Okay, that's fine.
So no, you know, the Davos set sorts were also like really into the COVID lockdowns and extreme lockdown and everybody work from home, everybody get the COVID shot, everybody wear masks, and we're going to pay for it all with this magical money, right? We're going to just print up trillions. So by their own prescription for the global economy is that we'll shut down. We'll all stay home and eat bonbons while the Chinese work and send us goods and services. The richest 1% of people amassed almost 2/3 of new wealth created in the last 10 years, Oxfam says. Now, I'll go into some of the data just so you know. Of course, their prescription is more taxes. They need higher taxes on the wealthy. But this is the same story. You know, the one of the only few things, there aren't very many things that are great about aging, but one thing is that you've been through a few cycles and you could say, well, this happened back in 2008, 2009, and that's when they started quantitative easing. And lo and behold, like 5 years later, they're like, oh, guess what? All that money we printed went entirely to the top 1%. And oh my God, they got so wealthy. Oh my God, we had no idea. Well, we're just going to have to tax them, right? And then they introduce a new tax and the 1% never pay it. Nope, no. It's just the ordinary Joe bag of donuts, and they get 87,000 new IRS agents to chase them down and, you know, probe their anal cavities for looking for, you know, some more pennies, right? So this is a situation again. So they're shocked, apparently, so shocked.
Right. The script is never varying. They print tons of money, and it all goes to disproportionately to the top 1/10 of 1%. Then they're all shocked. Then they say we're going to raise taxes. And of course, the taxes are only applied to reported income. And so most of the money that gets printed goes into that offshore pool of capital managed by the big four accounting firms that never sees the light of a tax agent and never gets taxed. It's never reported, right? So yes, it's true that the top 1 or 2% pay most of the tax, but only on their reported income, right? And they only report maybe 10 or 15% of their actual income. And the rest goes into that black market, that black pool.
Well, not even that, Max. So they don't receive the printed money as income. They receive it as stock price gains, as asset price gains. They own all the assets. the ordinary Joe bag of donuts, the guy in the bottom 90%, 95%, they work for a living. They receive an income. So they're the ones that are getting taxed on the new money because they receive their money in income or wealth transfers from the government. So the top 1%, Elon Musk became worth 300 billion on paper, not because he was like working hard and receiving a paycheck of like 50 billion a year. He was receiving, a stock price gains, right? So as they point out in this, so there was 42 trillion new printed money in the 2 years.
Right.
And almost all of it, like over half went, 2/3 went to the top 1%. And they said, so every a billionaire would receive $1.7 million for every $1 somebody in the bottom 90% received. So they received 1.7 million. So that's the problem with that fiat system and that fiat corruption in an age of, like I always say, where Bastiat said, when plunder becomes a way of life for a group of men in a society, over the course of time, they create for themselves a legal system that justifies it and a moral code that glorifies it. So we have this, legal system and moral code whereby they are justify that, okay, we're so benevolent. All these people meeting in Davos really care about the bottom 90%. We care so much about you. We're going to give you $1 each. But for all my hard work for giving you that money, I'm going to collect a 1.7 million for every dollar.
Exactly. But I mean, to your point, just to follow up a little bit.
Yeah.
So even this kind of black pool of assets that I'm talking about, that within that pool, there is asset sales and income generated. And the asset sales are not taxed, and the income generated, let's say on a bond, for example, is also not taxed. So that's what I'm saying. When you have a tax evasion complete in that pool, and that's estimated, last I saw, roughly $25 trillion is just captured and managed by those four big accounting firms. Nothing's ever taxed in there. Once something goes in there, it's gone forever. No government ever sees it. And people can draw on it, however, and they can go through, we've covered this before, the band U2 would use the Irish or Dutch sandwich, which is like you're taxed in one territory and then you're moving it to a separate territory. And then the income from the royalties on their music never seems to get taxed. And there's Bono at the Davos talking about how equitable everybody should be treated in the world. His band, they haven't paid tax in 50 years.
Well, no, and worse than that, he's not saying it's equitable. He's saying that governments should give more money to his cause, his group, which will go distribute some money to Africa or to other parts of the world. And therefore, you who have to pay the taxes, you pay for it. I'm not going to pay for it.
Exactly.
So he's not willing to pay for all the things he's arguing for, and he gets a seat at the table in Davos.
Right. So, Davos, once again, every year it's the same, kind of script, the same thing. It just gets more outlandish. The disproportionate between, as we've said for a while, it's gone from quintillionaires and it's gone from super rich and it's gone from the Gini coefficient, that's measuring the wealth gap in different countries. And we see, for example, France usually has a lower Gini coefficient than maybe the United States, for example. But we're so far off the charts in terms of even Gini coefficient. We are now in a period, you've got to call it neo-feudalism, where 99.9% of the global wealth is controlled by a few thousand people. And that's no longer akin to any economic system other than feudalism.
Right. Well, again, this is the same headline we've read over and over for years, for 20 years now. It's almost our 20th anniversary, February 13th. So we've been together for a long time, and we've been making financial news, macroeconomic. Before Bitcoin, we talked about gold in relationship to as some sort of, exit strategy from fiat and fiat fraud, financial fraud, banking fraud, central banking fraud, money printing, inflation. That was the only option back in 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then we found Bitcoin, but they always have that same headline, the financial news. Like this is part of that, dystopian, sort of fun dystopian, right? That that the writers predicted, the authors predicted, like Brave New World sort of future where everything is like fun and games, and you're on Instagram and you're being sent Biden bucks and Trump bucks and all sorts of free money, and you're working from home, eating bonbons, getting food deliveries, and the good times never seem to end. Well, in the meantime, like a real like dystopia is building out there. Like the notion of this CBDC, and of course they're talking about it again in Davos, and the surveillance and I mean there was another again, you know, okay, I'm not a journalist. I saw a headline go through there where there are like 300 agencies in the U.S. like looking at all the any of your transactions. Like there's a collection of your transactions that all these agencies are looking at in the U.S. or your financial transactions, but that they're gathering all this data, they're building this infrastructure while you're in that matrix, like that you're just sitting there in this free money matrix, where you think you're in a free money matrix. Again, remember, they're giving you $1, and for every dollar they give you, and you're so happy, and you're like, yeah, just feed me more, baby. Like every time they give you one more dollar, they take a 1.7 million. And of course, over the course of just these 2 years since they started it, or maybe it's almost 3 years now, you know, there's a huge gap that has emerged that you will never be able to jump across that.
No, I mean, just to put this into context, again, this is a story that we've been reported on many times over the past 20 years. They give the average Joe $1, and they take, and I'm so old, I remember when it used to be they take $100,000.
Yeah.
You know, and then every few years that number gets bumped up. Now we're at 1.7 million.
Yeah.
And the feudalistic nightmare that's unfolding is one where you literally have a society that's developed. I mean, people just have to look at the images on the street. You know, it's depressing to kind of describe exactly what's going on, but people are aware of what's going on.
I mean, remember where it all started. You said it was 9/11 in 2001 when the wealthy, there was some sort of indication that the whole game was over.
I'll tell you my thoughts on that. So I'm a New Yorker. I know New York very well, and New York is a town that has an enormous pride in itself as the best city in the world, the greatest city in the world. And there's a lot of money in New York. There's a lot of billionaires in New York. The media of the world is focused in New York. 9/11 had a profoundly negative impact on the United States, in that you saw in the media capital of the world a staged terrorist attack where not only one building was taken down, but then when all the media was focused on that one building going down, the second building went down. I think at that moment, the people in New York who are uber wealthy, and around the world as well, took that as an indication that, you know what, we need to start pulling our cash out of the system completely. No more philanthropy projects, no more good guy, no more Mr. Nice Guy. We need to start pulling our money out. And we saw liquidity dry up, and we saw the response from the Federal Reserve Bank was to lower rates and inject lots of cash. And a lot of that had to do with those with a lot of resources were pulling it out and putting in that offshore kind of black pool of capital. And I think we're still kind of in that period where the people who have, you know, the oligarchs and the robber barons from the 1920s, you know, a lot of them went on to build libraries, or they built social programs. You know, they felt an obligation to give back in a huge institutional way, build universities, build schools. We don't really see that anymore. You know, I'm open to be debated on this point, because I think that those with those resources are really just hightailing it out of town. They're like, we want to get out of here.
Well, so everybody always says what the fuck happened in 1971, but you could see in 2001, and I mean, 9/11 happened, but more importantly for what I think happened was December 2001, which was China was elevated to WTO under like status where they, even though they're like a tech supergiant now, they get to have all sorts of tariffs on U.S. goods because they're a developing nation, sort of thing. So this was the moment of the end of the elite of America basically abandoned it because they knew what was going to come. This was that, you know, we've talked about the cycles like the fourth turning, but one of them that we talk about is the Triffin dilemma, which had been identified long ago during, you know, the Bretton Woods days, where they were saying, Well, part of the problem with the U.S. dollar being reserve currency is, exactly what's happened. They'll have to export all of their jobs and manufacturing because you need a way to get U.S. dollars to the rest of the world, right? If your currency, if your national currency is going to be the global currency, you've got to send dollars overseas. So how do you send dollars overseas? Okay, you price oil in dollars. That's one way. But that's not enough to sustain the whole global, get enough dollars there because it, of course, all goes to Saudi Arabia, but you need some to China, Europe, everywhere else, right? So you sent all the manufacturing overseas. So when China was elevated to the WTO just after 9/11, that was another one of the building dropping. That was another building falling of the financial center. That's the manufacturing heartland that fell while everybody was focused on New York City. And New York City is just like paper, right? It's just the New York Fed. That's the entirety of New York City. They could print up whatever. But the manufacturing of the U.S. was at that very moment taken and sent overseas.
Yeah, and as we've talked about also, is that initially it wasn't necessarily perceived completely in a negative light because although wages started to go down and the high-paying manufacturing jobs disappeared, the prices of stuff that was manufactured in China and then shipped over and appeared in Walmart, like flat-screen TVs, clothes, and other items, went down precipitously. So even though your income went down, the price of stuff went down more. So your quality of life wasn't necessarily perceived to be degraded. However, what we've seen now in the last couple of years is the flip side of that. Now you've got inflation, not deflation, and your income is not keeping up, and now you've got a loss of standard of living.
Yeah, sure, because there's lagging. Obviously, it was an epochal shift, right? There was a huge shift. First one came in 1971, but then 2001 was the total abandonment of the pretense that we could sustain the Triffin dilemma situation, that we could sustain a normal wealth creating society based on a US dollar fiat standard. What they did was the gamification, because remember 2001 was just after the dot-com boom, and dot-com saw Hollywood and Silicon Valley take over a lot of the culture of the US. So you could have the CEOs with the see-through pants, and everything could be fun, and CNBC and gaming, and it was like a brave new world, and we could just send everybody $600. Remember, that's the first of the gamification of your disintegration of your society and your economy and your culture, and the deindustrialization. They turned it into a gamification. George Bush sent everybody $600. I didn't receive that. I've never once received any of these checks ever, right? That's maybe why I'm like here constantly through all these cycles, like reporting on it. Say, maybe if they gave me one of these checks, I would shut the STFU, right? But what they did is they gave $600. And of course, it's just after 9/11. And, that was a long time ago. So people were hyper patriotic then, right? We were invading all sorts of countries, bombing Afghanistan and getting ready to invade Iraq. So like there was no dissent. If you were like miserable that your factory just shut down, first of all, the news isn't going to cover it. But second of all, if you're against U.S. industry, U.S. Anything that would have been painted as anti-American, right? So their voices, they had to shut up, right? And especially the heartland, they were often, their politics was that they support the troops, right? So if they're using that moment of war to talk about themselves and complain about their joblessness, here's some fentanyl. At that time, it wasn't fentanyl, it was just opioids.
Yeah, and that political dynamic in the country where you had the heartland was kind of portrayed as not understanding how important it was for the U.S. to participate globally in this way, and was associated more with, let's say, right-wing politics. And you saw that completely flip. And this is the period we're living in now. It flipped totally in 2016 when Trump became president. And then what's been shocking is the reveal that the left is actually the most out of control of any of them.
Yeah, but again, that's because people just didn't cover it.
Yeah.
The stuff, the content is out there online if you want to go back and actually really look and see what happened. Because Matt Taibbi, who's in the news and now being ignored, by the way, all the stuff that he's publishing from the Twitter files, which show exactly what the Democrats, the left, whatever you want to call them, the Silicon Valley, the Hollywood, the Washington D.C., the New York City elite were doing. Conspiring against the American people and the people of the world, by the way, to communicate with each other, because it's not just an American issue. But in 2016, Matt Taibbi was out working for Rolling Stone, and he was reporting from the scenes of the rallies, which he said would go on for like 2 hours, right, at a Trump rally. And he would go out there and watch what was happening. And he would often note that the news, the mainstream media would just use like a 2-minute clip where something might, be painted or seen as racist. But the vast majority, he said, of all of Trump's speeches were basically Bernie Sanders stuff. He just like totally cribbed his stuff. And it was very anti-Davos sort of thing. It was like, those anti-G8 protests that started in 2001. Remember that huge one, the Battle of Seattle was in like 2001. So he was like giving those sort of speeches.
Right. So during that period where they exported all the jobs to China, you had politicians who were more on the conservative side, like a Ross Perot, was very vocal in saying, don't ship all your jobs. If you ship your manufacturing
giant
overseas,
sucking sound.
The giant sucking sound, right? And so, but the left and the liberals who control Hollywood and the media would belittle him and make him look foolish, and they attacked him, and he pulled out of his race for president. But they had a great hand in controlling the culture in a lot of ways, because the coolest people, the movie stars, were associated with the Democrats. And but in 2016, the tables were flipped. Trump really took the media and grabbed it by the I'm not going to fill in the beep. And so then we saw in the left, when the veneer falls down, and they're not really the lovey-dovey, soft, fuzzy, culturally minded New Yorker magazine reading, innocents that they portray themselves to be. They're really vicious, authoritarian. So authoritarianism lives with the Democrats. That's where it lives and breathes. And now that's been exposed. And that's what I think the biggest reveal of the past few years.
Well, I kind of consider it like a totalitarianism.
Yeah.
Adam Curtis has described exactly this sort of thing. He's like the modern Orwell, right? Orwell was describing the totalitarian mindset. It wasn't like Hollywood tends to paint everything as like one bad guy takes over the world, and like he alone is responsible for all the stuff that happens, the carnage, the dystopia, when it's the mindset of the elite population that has like fascism emerged out of the elite, right? The industrialists. The same thing with what's going on now. With maybe we don't have a name for it yet. We don't have the same situation as the 20s, 30s, and 40s of Europe. We have a different thing, but the elite this time are the U.S. cultural elite, the New York City Wall Street elite, the Silicon Valley elite, and it's up to history. Whoever writes the history books to determine what it's going to be called, but it is the same. It's within a section of the Wikipedia will be under totalitarianism. All of them are.
Right, a flavor of totalitarianism, which we haven't yet seen, but we have a kind of an indication. So the reveals of the Twitter files certainly give us an insight into what these folks are thinking about. That absolute 360-degree control over every piece of material that enters the public domain is reviewed, censored, edited, transformed, and that is beyond just censorship. It is dystopian. They've created a dystopian environment where the words coming out of your mouth are morphed in mid-sentence into different words. And then
Yeah.
you're portrayed as having said that, and then somebody else who reacts to it is actually a robot who's talking to another bot who's writing a story about you and why you said that in real time against you. And now they're mobs after you for something that was transformed in mid-sentence that you never said. This type of really control of technology in the media that we're seeing unfold now in deep fakes and things like this are where it's hard to imagine exactly where it's going, but you see it taking shape.
Yeah, and there's well, that's always the important thing too, is that totalitarianism comes at these epochal shifts in power, because power never relents, right? This is one lesson. Well, Bastiat, this is what he talks about in his essay, The Law, right? This is why we formed a republic. But now we have Bitcoin, right? The Bitcoin is the one that's uncorruptible. Republics are corruptible, right? Because whoever gets control of the judiciary. This is why in the United States there's like mass fights, and they used to be polite, but now there's actual viciousness and verging on political civil war over like packing the Supreme Court and things like that. This is part of that Bastiat talking about the plunder, how it's become when it becomes a way of life for a group of people at the top, the elite, and some are different political parties, but what they're trying to control is the apparatus that justifies it and glorifies it.
I mean, this word of plundering, is you see it throughout society. So you see people going into convenience stores and walking out with hundreds of dollars worth of stuff, and they don't pay for it, and nobody's chasing them. They're plundering. Then you see the political classes plundering. And it gets back to that 9/11 reference, which is like the beginning of a plundering era, where the people said, you know what, I'm not even going to hide the fact that I'm really moving stuff around and I'm not paying taxes, but I've sponsored a camp for blind children, and I'm a good person. They're just saying, you know what, I'm just going to plunder. And that is just permeated throughout every strata, right? From the bottom, from the person who's, going into CVS drugstore and ripping off a bottle of aspirin to, a political operative in Washington, D.C. who might be a senator who's trading on inside information. But
yet, when you mention those plundering the CVSs and the, Walmart, the mostly the pharmaceutical stores, because like the Soma is sold there, right? Like it makes sense. This is part of the elite control of a system that is disintegrating. It is just disintegrating. Entropy hits everything. Bitcoin is the most entropy resistant of anything invented by man or God, nature. But with when you see the plunder being encouraged and tolerated, where is it? It's exactly where I said, where the elite rule. It's in New York City, it's in San Francisco, and it's in Hollywood, where they're allowing it, right? Because they're the ones, the elite there, who are plundering the world. So they're projecting onto those people like, sure, we'll let them steal $100 because 100 times 1.7 million, I just made 17 million.
Right, if they steal $100 and they got to print another 100, which means somebody gets one and they get 1.7 million.
Yeah.
Right, so it's in their best interest. That's why they never prosecute the plunderers, because they're going to print more money, in which they get a disproportionate amount of thereof.
But it's also about their understanding that they're losing control. This is why they're turning to the FBI and the 30, 40, 50, who knows how many intelligence agencies there are now. I'm so old, I remember when there were 17. Actually, when I was a child, I think there were only 3, right? Like there was like the FBI. And that was created, in the 20s or 30s, right? During the Prohibition era. But then there was like just the CIA and FBI. Then there was Homeland Security created during 9/11. That's when we decided to ship all those jobs overseas and abandon America and abandon the concept of America. And then all these other agencies, who knows how many there are, but they're all spying on you, and they're all looking for any signs of unrest. And that's why, of course, they're controlling, they have a back door into observing the raw feed that is, your mind, right? These are your thoughts, right? There's that thing in Homeland, that TV series based on all of this stuff, where at the opening titles are just like all the airwaves, right? Of the Secret Service, CIA, whatever, listening in on everybody's phone calls of like, potential threats to the government or something.
Yeah, there's a great, I believe, 1970s film called The Conversation.
Yes.
With Gene Hackman.
Yeah.
That was foretold this type of future, and it's a great classic film, and it's worth watching to see how artists at that time and filmmakers of the time, I forget the director.
Wasn't it Coppola?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. Coppola.
It was one of his first.
One of his earliest films.
Yeah.
And it's a classic, and it really gets into these characters and the business of spying and how it becomes it's a great film. I recommend it.
Yeah. So that's the totalitarianism. What you're starting to see is like when they're, so when in the Conversation, when Gene Hackman plays, he's one of those. This is the thing. He was working for the NSA, right? And they have all these freelance people who they just burn, just like the CIA does. Like they burn anybody who's like one of their hitmen in, Central America. They pretend they have no idea who this guy is, why he has all these weapons, and why he just killed somebody. Like they just burn them. So that's what when he got spotted. When he understood that they knew that he was listening, like where he was, he like burned everything, right, and ran away.
That building was like off grid, and they got exposed.
Yeah,
and he burnt it down. Now there was a remake of the film relatively recently with Will Smith.
Yeah,
it was called Enemy of the State.
Yeah,
and it's an excellent remake. Usually, a lot of times remakes suck. But in this case, it was and Will Smith is great in it. And I think Gene Hackman plays a small cameo in the film. But it's also, you see he's in Washington, maybe a lawyer, and suddenly he finds out his clothes. And they show him getting bugged. Like all these bugs are being inserted, boom, 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 boom. And he meets a guy like a Gene Hackman and has to get debugged. And but then we're way beyond that. I mean, that's already 20 years ago. And the sophistication and the ability to survey and all the transactions have now reached new levels.
But that's what I'm saying is like those guys who are insiders and building the control system, they're all ordinary people, right? Everybody's an ordinary person. It's what your role is within that system. If you understand the system. So what I'm saying is like what you're seeing is the people who built this control system, who built the social media networks, who built the social credit scores, who are building the CBDCs. They're also aware that this could go horribly wrong for them, and that the mobs, if they wake up, if they unplug themselves from the matrix, if that $600 check back in 2003 or 2002 is not good enough, and then they send 2,000 and then 5,000 and then 10,000 and then PPP loans of 100,000. Like if that's not enough, they know what these people are going to come for them, and they hear all your whispers. They see your DMs on Twitter, and they know when to run. And there's a sense that they're running, that they're getting ready to run. That's what.
Yeah. I forget who said this quote or what the exact quote, but there's a quote like the face of evil is banality.
Yes.
As you're saying, like there's just a guy who's installing bugs, somewhere doing a job as part of this massive machine. And he's just a Joe bag of donuts. He's not a sinister dude. He's
was
just
it like
guy.
Hannah Arendt? It was like, I think it was the Germans that came up with that, the banality of evil.
Yeah.
The Graham Greene's novels were also set during that time. The banality, the evil character was always very banal and very somebody
unnoticeable, which made them easy to do what they were doing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, that's true. Now, here in El Salvador, of course, you made an interesting comment this week, which I wanted to repeat. You, with Bastiat, as you quote often about making plunder a way of life, and it becomes permeates every institution in society. Here, it's almost the absolute opposite, where the goal is the reverse of plunder. They are coming out of the plunder. I forget how you said it, but it was really well said. Can you say that?
I'll see if I can say it. But I said, well, first I said it regarding when the president had tweeted a link to some video footage of them building that new road out to the east. And then when they were, he unveiled 6 of the Kubos yesterday, which are these, these centers in deprived areas like Soyapango was one of the locations of Popa, out in La Union. So they're like really cool buildings and places to hold classes, libraries, like a place for local students, kids, youth to go and learn. But I said, when plunder is no longer a way of life for a group of men in a society like El Salvador, and obviously it's been a place of plunder for decades. First you had like external plunder, where it was plundered by the Spanish and then the Americans, and it was just plundered of all of its people and its commodities and its wealth. Then the local politicians then just plundered. Since the Civil War, it's just been plunder, plunder, plunder. And then the gangs plunder, plunder, plunder. And I mean, some of the amounts, like obviously the gangs were stealing up to 30% of GDP, which is an enormous amount. The politicians, so you think now it's a $30 billion economy, but say even that, they weren't just stealing like $1 million or $2 million. They were stealing like 250 million. And you're just like, it's a huge chunk of GDP. It's the equivalent of, say, if Hunter Biden had taken, so if it's a $22 trillion economy, had taken like 2.5 trillion. It's like an enormous amount of the economy they were stealing here. So now that doesn't happen anymore. And so when plunder is no longer a way of life for a group of men in the society, the people who run the economy here, so it's no longer the way, then it would make sense that it would go the opposite. Then they no longer, when it's a group of men plundering, then they build for themselves a legal system that justifies it. Now the legal system prosecutes the plunder and stops it, and it's enforced. The law is enforced. That's why you have the gangs have been all arrested. That's why the corrupt mayoress is arrested. And the moral code is shifting. So you see that in the actions of, like, instead of nothing, part of the cycle of the economy being so poor here is that on the bottom you had the gangs like plundering the people, but at the top you couldn't build infrastructure, right? Because the politicians would steal. If it was a $100 million project, they had to steal 85 million, leaving 15 million that then got half of it got plundered by the gangs, and then the other bit, so nothing happened, right?
Yeah, it's like seeing a film where instead of a compressed, sped up version of something collapsing, it's a reverse. You're seeing something that has collapsed spontaneously. It's in reverse. You're seeing it all come together in reverse. It's all being built up in reverse. So you're going from everywhere else in the world seems to be experiencing entropy, just dissolving and uncontrollably being fragmentized and atomatized and sliced and diced and thrown to the wind. Here it's like spontaneous order, spontaneous combustion, spontaneous. It's all coming together spontaneously, and so it's getting to be more of a dramatic contrast, I would say. This Cube announcement that the President Bukele made this past week, he's out there, and just like you're watching this thing, two things happened. First of all, he announced Miss Universe contest is coming to El Salvador next year. It was a drop during the actual Miss Universe pageant, and people are like, oh wow, fantastic, that's going to be a huge winner. It's a big tourist boom. It shows that this place is open for business.
And
then,
safe. And safe because it's safe. Yeah.
2 days later, they dropped this, here I am. I'm in 6 different cities. I'm putting up these cubes, as they're called, which is an acronym for something. And they're local centers for all kinds of access to technology and learning centers and job centers, right? So it's a real community access point for people who want to learn and grow and do stuff like that. So that's all that happened within 2 or 3 days. I mean, just boom, boom, boom. And that's just spontaneously all coming together.
Well, yeah. So now the moral system and the legal system are encouraging, glorifying the opposite of plunder, which is building. Right. The president talks about that all the time. This is why we're here. This is why so many Bitcoiners are here, because Bitcoiners are builders, right? The founding ethos of Bitcoin is cypherpunks write code, and that's what it's saying is like we don't talk, we just build, right? We writing code in Bitcoin is building. If you're running a country, obviously you have to build roads and sewage systems and water treatment plants and things like that too, and schools and kubos and things like that. So, this is the mentality of a hard money, of somebody with a low time preference who's not plundering, who's not proof of stake, who doesn't think like, hey, I'm an elite. Like he obviously the president, by nature of being the president, you're elite, right? You're the top, but he's not a proof of stake mindset. That's it, like all the previous presidents you could look at over the past few decades, they just got to that spot and then plundered. And here, this guy is like, basta, this is enough. We're like, we're not going to plunder anymore, and we're going to build, right? We're going to start building, and no more plundering.
Yeah, and we're right in the thick of it. We're witnessing it, and we do this podcast to report on it, and we live here. And hopefully, you get a sense of what it's like, and we're getting a ton of people. So January 30th is an event in El Zonte at the Garten Hotel in the Villas section. We've got already tickets are flying.
Sold out, Max.
So this will be like we did one of these about 8 months ago, and it's a great vibe. You get about 160, 170 people.
Robert Breedlove is coming.
Robert Breedlove will be there. He's looking forward to that. He's a brilliant writer on Bitcoin and things social. So that's coming up January 30th. And so I'm looking forward to that. And then we'll be back here doing this show probably in the next few days, next Wednesday or what have you. But that's I think that's going to just about do it for this episode of Orange Pill Podcast. And until next time, I think it's just bye, y'all.
Bye, y'all.